Hello varlets. Before I begin, I just want to preface this video by saying that this was supposed to be a much longer video covering Darktide's timeline, my in-depth suggestions on how to improve the game, and of course my recommendation. I've since trimmed back a lot of the original and will release the cutout parts as part of a State of the Game series that begins with this video. If you just want to hear my thoughts about whether I recommend this game or not, skip to the timestamp shown on screen. For everyone else still here, let's go on a short history tour of Darktide. Fat Shark's Warhammer 40k Darktide has been out for 6 months as of this recording. With that, this video will act as a summarized timeline to show how Darktide has changed since its launch back in 30th November 2022. And, given its current state 6 months later, if it's worth coming back to once more or picking it up for the first time. Let's get into it. Long time ago, in a more bright and hopeful past, there was an enormous amount of hype building up for the launch of Darktide. Fat Shark's marketing team had done an excellent job in getting people invested in the game just through its class spotlights, short stories, and world-building trailers. I remember I was on holiday in Thailand and I was so anxious waiting for the trailers for each class to come out that I'm pretty sure I returned from that holiday more worn out than I started with. Finally, the day arrived. November 30th came and Darktide was officially launched. That day, over 107,000 players logged in to start their journey in serving the God Emperor of mankind. As expected, some players had to deal with bugs, numerous network problems and stability issues. On the other hand, players that could play the game without much problems enjoyed it. The core game itself felt like an improvement over Fat Shark's previous flagship title, Vermintide 2. Melee combat felt more visceral and they got the balance between ranged and melee combat just right, at least in the early difficulties. But it didn't take very long for fundamental gameplay problems to start creeping up. Beyond character creation, there was actually very little player agency. Item acquisition was random. You completed missions to farm money or ducats that were to be spent at an armory with whose inventory would rotate. There was no guaranteed way of obtaining a weapon you wanted, even after you qualified for it by leveling your character up. What's more, the weapons you got had stat bars that you couldn't improve on. You had to work with what you had until you got something better, which also proved to be a problem because the weapon stat bars were just that, bars without any information about what this particular stat did or its importance and how it affected the weapon. At this time, weapon crafting, which was the backbone of your character's progression, wasn't fully implemented yet. The only thing we could control was upgrading our weapon's rarity to enhance it in the form of perks and blessings, both of which, you guessed it, we couldn't control and was in the hands of RNG as well. On top of all of that, character progression was siloed. The progress you made on one character in terms of the weapons you got, the materials you collected, and the ducats you earned was not shared. Starting a new character meant you had to effectively start from scratch with no carryover benefits at all. The only thing that did carry over was premium currency. So, with layers of RNG upon RNG upon RNG and a progression system that didn't respect the player's time, it's no surprise that players quickly grew very frustrated with the game. This was even more so for players that loved Vermintide 2. We wanted so badly to love this game because the core gameplay loop, the feel of combat and the setting was so good. But everything else around it was a straight downgrade and a letdown compared to Vermintide 2 as it stood. Within a month, Darktide had lost 27% of its player base. However, things really turned out worse for the game in the months to come. At this time, being a Swedish company, Fat Shark would be on Christmas holiday during a time when Darktide was in a dire crisis. Weeks of having to endure playing a game that didn't offer meaningful progression because the system was not in place, nor respected the player's time investment because of the RNG grind wall, quickly caused it to hemorrhage players. Within 2 months of launching, Darktide lost over 77% of its peak players. The average number of active players was under 10,000. To cut a long story short, once Fat Shark was back in action when most of its employees had returned from their holidays in the new year, an open letter was issued to players saying that, in light of the current state of the game, all upcoming seasonal content and premium cosmetics would be suspended until the game was in a much better and stable state. So, from the month of January all the way till May, almost every other week there was a hotfix being pushed out to address stability issues. At the same time, patches were rolling in to introduce bits and pieces of content that was supposed to be in the game at the start. While it was great that we were getting more communication from Fat Shark and core gameplay elements like crafting and informative weapon stats were being implemented, this was a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because almost every time something new was introduced, something else somewhere would break. Despite this, the game was gradually moving into a state that it should have been right at the start. However, core game design decisions like implementing perk and blessing locks continued to baffle what was left of the player base. Even with all these improvements towards progression, the game still did not respect the player's time invested into it. Without an answer addressing what their design intentions were, what was left of the remaining player base eroded away with time. This brings us to today, where the latest patch, patch number 10, Rejects Unite, brings us Darktide's first community event along with 2 new missions, one of which is locked behind the community event and is the final reward for completing it. As of writing this script, the 24-hour peak for what Fairchunk is calling a large content drop is around 7,600 players, which is a far cry from what it was back in December 2022. With the exception of the problem introduced with this patch where AMD GPU users can't even launch the game and some problems with cosmetics, the overall state of the game is technically in a much better spot than it was back in December. Of course, that's not a really high bar to jump over. Right now, the game is more or less where it should have been 6 months ago. That being said, getting a game into a playable state isn't enough, especially not when Fairchunk marketed Darktide as a live service game. Without actual content coming in on a regular basis, and I don't count cosmetics as content, long-time players like myself are struggling to find excitement and joy in the game. So, given Darktide in its current state as of this recording, and after playing it for 670 hours, do I recommend you get this game or pick it back up? My answer is, it depends. I know that is such a non-answer, but hear me out. The long and short of my recommendation is this. If you want to casually experience some of the most well-designed and visceral melee and range combat in the Warhammer 40k universe, the game is now in a good enough state where you can do just that. The sound, the sights, the music, the combat are all top shelf and will not disappoint you in that regard. However, if you find yourself loving the game a lot and want to invest more time and effort into it, I would err on the side of caution, because right now, the game is not able to provide you with an experience that is respectful of the time that you want to invest into it. Like many of us still playing this game right now, it's like finding yourself in a one-sided relationship and you are on the losing end of things. So, if you like the idea of being immersed in probably one of the best and most well-designed Warhammer 40k settings made to date, and don't mind having no expectations about the development of the game, then by all means, get Darktide and just have fun with it. The game is in a good enough state that I can at least recommend it if this is what you are after. I will say it again, as long as you want to play this game for the core gameplay loop and do not mind dealing or caring about the frustrations of basically having almost no agency outside of the combat experience, then this game is at least worth getting to try out. Just remember, coming in right now, your relationship with Darktide will be one-sided until the foreseeable future. With that, this video has come to an end. I hope you found my summary clear and recommendations fair. Most importantly, I hope you enjoyed watching this video and found it useful in making a decision. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.